Alright, so today we're going to be building this section, this grid of categories. It's actually something taken from the ASOS store, so let's do it. First, our design, I'm using XD just as for now, and I am having my new project here. I'm going to call this, let me just see, AIA. Okay, let's call it this way, create project. Okay, so first, I'm starting to check what the width is for the container of this layout. So I'm just going to very quickly make this block and check that this is approximately 1400, and because of that I'm going to first create a section. I'm going to call it section, let's call it a perfect /1. So my section is going to be having a padding of 18 pixels, and inside of it I'm going to create another div block for a container. Same code for this exercise. Container number 1 that is going to have a width of 100%, that is going to be centered, okay, horizontally, and that is going to have a max width of 1400. Just because of this is the 1400 happen to be the size of my reference design over here. So that being done, the reason I created a section that had a pattern is just for in some sort of margin space to this container. We'll check this out in a few minutes when trying to reduce the screen size. So instead of that element, I'm going to create 2 additional blocks. One of those is going to relate to the upper section of this design. The other one will contain the actual grid here. I'm just using colors for kind of explain the why is that I'm going to create those 2 divs. So inside of the container, I'm going to have 2 divs. The first one I'm going to call it, say, heading wrapper. I'm going to use the same code to differentiate this section, and let's call it number 1. And right over here I'm going to have grid wrapper. Okay, I'm going to use my special code number 1. I always name the classes, and I always use a sort of code to differentiate my blocks, my sections, one of another. Just for kind of following a organization when creating elements. So note that I did that. I noticed that I'm having 2 rows here for the heading section. So I'm going to create inside 2 additional divs. One of those I'm going to call it headline box number 1. Say number 1. The other one I'm going to name it tagline box number 1. Okay, so inside of this one I'm going to drop my heading. I'm just going to use a H2 and type level for the sake of simplicity right now. I'm not having any reason to use H1 or H2 actually. So I'm going to call this headline number 1. I am going to create right away the tagline, or say the tagline, this link that says shop all. Right over here, I'm going to drop a text link for that element. And I'm going to tag it, to name it tagline number 1. So let's go to create some styles for them. So for this one, I'm having 36 bold, and this is sort of a, say, purple dark color. So I'm going to use this purple dark color. I'm going to add it as a swatch on this Webflow project. I'm going to have 36 pixels for the size of this text, and I usually use 1.3 EM as the height of headlines. The reason I'm using EM is I like to set the height of the line as a proportion of the size of that line. That makes things quite a little more easy than using pixels. But that is kind of a matter of taste from person to person. I'm going to center this, and finally I'm going to just copy and paste the name, the actual text that I'm going to have for this headline. Now, as for the tagline, I'm going to use a display block element so that the element, the link text element, covers the entire area that contains it. Next, I'm going to be checking these styles for this particular tagline. This is 16 regular, and I have this gray color for it. So I'm going to have gray color 16. I'm going to use 1.6 EM. Then again, this survey, I'm used to use EM for the height of the lines. I often use 1.3 EM for headlines, and I use 1.6 for everything else. It's not a rule, it is just kind of my the way I often proceed with it. But if you're not having any particular taste for using EM or anything else, you're just free to follow this example, this advice, or this way to proceed. Now, I'm going to have a 0 margin at the top of this headline element. Webflow is having by default 20 and 10 as top and bottom margins for headlines. I'm going to set this to 0, and I'm just going to check visually the distance between those two elements. It seems like it is approximately 10 points. So for the container, the box that contains this element, I'm going to add 10 pixels. There's no particular reason why you should or not use the headline or the container of the headline for adding this margin. It's just kind of I am used to have those margins to be set for the elements that are, say, brother, that are siblings. So instead of having the margin for the element that is inside the element that is going to be actually be separated from this one below, I'm going to have the margins applied to the actual elements that are going to be one next to each other, which in this case is this one. Also, I'm just used to have margins on the top towards the bottom. But then again, there are no rules here. This is just kind of the way that I used to proceed with, so that my work is consistent, and it is consistent for people that is going to do something with the code that I'm producing here in Webflow, through this interface, and also that is consistent for myself when getting back to things that I can just immediately recognize, okay, this is the box that is for which my margin is applied. Okay, back to work. Let's now go towards the grid. So I already made this top area for desktop. Let's now take care of the grid, which is this area below. So I'm having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes. So what I'm going to do here is to create a div block that I'm going to call grid. Number 1. And I'm going to select layout displayed grid. Next, I'm going to add up to 6 columns. Okay. And next, I'm going to very quickly check the distance between those columns. I noticed that the distance is approximately 14. I like to take round numbers, by the way. So this is 14 for me, and this is kind of 25 or 24 this exercise. So the gap that I'm going to add on columns will be 14 in here, and it will be 25 in here for rows. That being done, I'm going to proceed to add a div block for a element inside of this grid. Now I'm going to call this a grid item number 1. And this is just going to be sort of a container on which I will add a link block. Now the reason I'm adding this link block inside this grid item instead of using a link block as a grid item is that if you are going to have this to become a say a CMS element, a listing, you will surely require at some point to use this link block over here to be inside the grid item that the box that provides by default. Let me just show you. Here's a collection item. Now, this collection item will be the equivalent to this grid item that we just created. If you have this link block as the grid item and you would like to use this interface that we are going to create as a collection list element, you will have to delete this and then get a new element over here to be the link, because of this over here, this collection item isn't a link. Instead, if you're having this link inside the element that is going to be the grid item, you can just have the tag grid item in here, then get the link block inside grid item and follow the very same structure that you are having in here for your collection list. Okay, so that is pretty much the reason. I'm pretty sure I will get this explained in a following exercise. Yes. No, let's call this grid item link. Number 1. Okay. Let's have this 100% width, and let's just check this out again. Now we are having 2 elements inside each item. One at the top that is going to relate to show you the picture, and another one at the bottom that is going to be relating to the name of this category. So that is just what we're going to do here. So let's get tagged 2 div blocks. Let's call one at the top grid item top number 1. And let's call the other one grid item bottom number 1. Instead of this one, we're going to have a picture. So I'm going to have this as a created pic number 1. And for 1, there's a at the bottom, we're going to have a text element. Then I'm going to call grid item name number 1. That's it. Okay. So let's now work on styles. So the picture is going to be 100% wedge, because of I am assuming that all pictures will be squared by default. I am not going to be worried about managing this as a perhaps, I don't know, maybe a div block that is forced to be perfectly square, that is going to have a picture inside or a picture as a background. I'm just going to pretend that the pictures uploaded in here are just squared, and that's it. So, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to do that. Next, I'm going to check the styles for this text. This is 18 pixels, regular. So let's do 18 pixels. I'm going to have my 1.5 EM that I often use. I'm going to use normal, that is equivalent of regular. It says Halloween. I'm going to be centering this text. And for colors, I'm not going to assign color here this time. I'm going to assign the color into this grid item element, because of this is the link that is going to provide this color and this underline to this text. So in here is that I'm going to select the color that I'm using. Let me just check that color is this one, 1D1. It's quite different. Anyways, let's use that one. And I am also going to use style decoration none. That's it. Now I'm having a distance of about 15 pixels in between those two elements. Then again, I'm not setting the margin or the spacing for the element inside the element that is actually being separated from this other one, but I'm using the margins between the actual elements that are going to be one next to each other. So I'm using 15 pixels here. I'm also going to check the margin that is between those two elements. It looks like it is approximately 27. I'm going to use 30 pixels here. Okay. Notice I'm not setting the third pixels on this tagline, for instance, right? Or this tagline box. But I'm going to set that distance in between the elements that are going to be one next to each other. This is a personal rule. It is just kind of the way that I tried to provide consistency to my class's properties. Okay, let's just move forward with this. I'm having round images, so I'm going to just set for the container of the picture a overflow hidden, and I'm going to have a radius of I don't know, I'm going to have 1000 pixels. It's not necessary to exaggerate with 1000, but it just is kind of the same. Instead of getting here to see, okay, these are exactly 200 pixels, I just use a larger number just to be sure. And that being done, I'm just going to, I'm just going to be copying and pasting the elements that I require. So, for the sake of this exercise, I'm not going to be that worried about the actual content that is inside a fetch box. Or maybe I will. If you're patient enough to follow me on this video, I will be patient enough as for copying and pasting at least half of those elements that I'm having here. Let's just do the text out list. Okay, let's get one of those pictures. Oh, let me just check. Are those pictures actually squared? Yes, they are. Okay, here we have it. Let's just get this exported. Let's use a JP actually. Okay. Perfect. And let's now get our sample in here. Perfect. So now we have the structure for desktop. Let's make this responsive now. I previously told you about creating a margin of 18 pixels of this element, and the reason is that if we have no margins in here, here's how it will look like for any screen that is smaller of 1400 pixels. Now it might look pretty nice on a large screen, but if you're not having any margins in here, for smaller screens, this is how it will look like. So I often do 80 pixels on both sides of screens, just for safety. That all depends on each project, of course. Now I will take her on tablets, so I'm going to do 40 pixels for tablets. I'm going to reduce this to 28 for this text. I'm going to stick to 16 for all text on those interfaces. Actually, I noticed that 1.3 AM is better for this text over here for names. And also for tablets, I'm going to reduce the columns to 4. I'm going to have 20 pixels for columns and rows alike as well. And I'm going to reduce the margins to, say, 10 pixels here. Perfect. Kind of looks correct, I think. Let's now do the mobile landscape. Actually, I believe this just looks, it works for mobile. I think I'm going to reduce this to 24 mobile. Maybe the margin here can be reduced a little bit. Maybe it's okay like it is right now. Yes, I'm going to just reduce this to 5 pixels. And let me get this 24 pixels in here. So yes, that kind of works, I think. And finally, let's go for mobile portrait. And I often do 25 pixels at the sides on mobile. And for this grid, I believe that 2 is just enough for what we require. It is, I mean, using 1 will be probably not best choice, since this is eCommerce and users will have to scroll just a lot to read all the items. So for this kind of lists on eCommerces, we actually used to have 2 columns on mobile. And that's it. We're done.